Welcome back to Just Chattin', and this is the series of videos we do on Thursday and Sunday evenings just for our own entertainment. Here's the bad cat. Okay, now he's gone. He seems to be happy that he got his 2 seconds of airtime. He has been boycotting my videos for the last couple of weeks. He's been nearby, but he really hasn't wanted to do the on-camera time. Just not quite ready for his close-up. Well, before we get started on the main body of the video, I thought we would start off with a couple of interesting tidbits that have been in the news. First of all, Nutmeg went on a pap walk. So she was out in Los Angeles in August. Of course, this was just a few days ago. According to one of the newspapers that released the photos, they said she was out in 70-degree weather. Well, you know I never take their word for anything. I actually checked out what the temperature in LA was on that day, and it's listed right at the bottom of these shots. Somewhere between 68 degrees, which would have been the low, which means around 5 in the morning, and 83, which would have been around maybe 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So for most of the day, it would have been very close to 80. And she was out in a wool coat. Now, take a close look at the shot in the middle, because I'm going to show you a very, very similar shot. Here you go. This was published in another publication, and they, in fact, kept the photographer's watermark at the bottom, and it came from Backgrid, one of Nutmeg's favorite dial-a-paps. And here's an enlargement of that little logo, just in case you couldn't make it out. And that photo, the one that was marked Backgrid, and the photo in the middle are so close in terms of the images that they had to have been snapped perhaps a fraction of a second apart, which suggests to me there might have been more than one photographer there. She didn't seem to be going anywhere. She was just walking around a parking lot advertising her clothing. This is getting ridiculous, but I want you to keep that in mind. Nutmeg's pap walks, which she is still doing, because we're going to talk a little bit about that later. Now, on the sock puppet front, he did have his polo match in, I think it was Singapore. I don't follow polo, and I don't care where the sock puppet goes, frankly. But his team lost to his friend Nacho's team, but of course they made sure they were both shown together holding the trophy, because naturally we can't make it look like the sock puppet lost. 4-year-olds don't take that sort of thing well. We have to give them consolation prizes. But I find it absolutely absurd that a grown man found it necessary to stand there holding the trophy along with the captain of the team that actually won it. It's just getting more and more ridiculous by the minute. So, when we come back, we are going to get into the video. Well, this is part 2 in our series of why we don't like these people. And I really feel it is important to do this periodically, a little occasional recap, in part to remind us, because they flood us with reasons, but to remind us of some of the first reasons, the first things that struck us as red flags or began to turn us off to them. Also, because we are gathering new people every day, and they may not know the history. So we need to make sure we keep that alive, because heaven forbid that we start forgetting what really happened, because Nutmeg and the sock puppet are only too happy to give us their own version of those events. And as we know, it's a far cry from reality. So when I left off on Thursday, we hadn't even gotten to the wedding. We were almost at the wedding, but not quite. So we are still ahead of the wedding. So let's start talking about those pap walks. When Nutmeg was first dating the sock puppet, and we have discussed this, we discussed this on Thursday, the relationship was not this just sailing on glass, wonderful love story they are pretending it was. Certainly not what came out in Finding Freedom, or in their Netflix docudrama, or in the sock puppet's memoir. I always roll my eyes when I say that. I kind of have to. That's not how it went down. It was a lot more turbulent than that. And Nutmeg, in the early stages of the relationship, was determined to lock the sock puppet in. And one of her main ploys in doing this was to make the relationship public. Now, she was publishing photos on her Instagram site, and of course, we have all these pap walks as well, but publishing photos on her Instagram site of her wearing the necklace Harry had given her, H&M, of her wearing bracelets that matched his, of her with the little lovey bananas, whatever that meant. That was a bit of weirdness. Of her dog in a little Union Jack doggy sweater, just to make sure no one lost sight of the fact that she was dating the grandson of the Queen. And of course, the real coup de grace was when she persuaded the sock puppet that he had to make a public statement, because she was being besieged by the paparazzi and she was in fear for her life. They were going to kill her, just like they killed his mommy, assuming, of course, his mommy is dead, which we now know is a point on which he is not especially clear. So, not sure how she framed that. Your mother, if she's dead, was killed by them, and they are hounding me. I imagine it went down something like that. So we had all of that, and that was starting to throw up red flags for a lot of the people who were the early observers of the relationship. Why was she so actively dropping all of these over-the-top hints, but no one on the other side of the pond was responding? So, as I say, she changed that dynamic very quickly. Then, as we get closer to the wedding, we have the big splash that was Tiaragate. Apparently, the Queen offered Nutmeg her choice of a number of tiaras. Now, this is something that has come out in so many variations, I'm just going to have to throw out allegedly before we get into any of this. So, allegedly, this is what happened. Apparently, Nutmeg didn't want them. She wanted an unspecified emerald tiara. Now, there are, in fact, 3 major emerald tiaras in the Queen's collection. And let's start with the first one. This is the Vladimir tiara. This is a tiara that had originally belonged to the Russian royal family, was taken in by the British royal family, presumably purchased, but I really don't know how it came into their possession. And then we have the next one, and this is the Kokoshnik tiara that Princess Eugenie wore to her wedding. But we also have the Victoria tiara. So who knows which one it was? Is it a believable story? Absolutely. Absolutely. Did the Queen offer her any of these tiaras? No, apparently not. But it was one of these tiaras that she wanted. And the fact is, it could have been a completely separate emerald tiara. But apparently that was what she wanted, an emerald tiara. I'm throwing you out my top 3 choices for the tiara in question. If I had to bet, I would say it's the Vladimir tiara. The Queen wore that quite often, and in addition to the drop emeralds, it also has a set of drop pearls, and I've seen a version of it with drop aquamarines, but I don't believe that is the same tiara. I think that is a reproduction of this tiara made for some other purpose. Be that as it may, these tiaras are all over the internet. So, did the Queen have to show Nutmeg the tiara for Nutmeg to be aware of its existence? Of course not. All she had to do was Google emerald tiara. Trust me, try it sometime. You will get hundreds of images. According to the sock puppet, in his memoir, such as it is, that wasn't what happened at all. According to him, it was just the result, this Tiaragate was the result of a lot of difficulties presented by Angela Kelly, the Queen's longtime friend and dresser, who was not being cooperative and making the tiara available to Nutmeg so that she could have it at her disposal when she was dealing with her hairdressing and makeup appointments. And that brings up a whole new issue, because these were the headlines that were coming out. Meghan spends $10,000 on hair and makeup for the wedding. Got one of those articles, and there were many. I've just listed one in the video notes. Yeah, $10,000 for this? Why would she even need to have the tiara fitted in advance, given the fact that she wasn't even going to comb her hair? Now, Nutmeg had a long, long history of walking out in public looking like she had combed her hair with an Osterizer blender. The woman looked like an unmade bed all the time. It was really... It cast the royal family in a bad light, quite frankly. You just don't expect a member of the Queen's family to go out in the streets looking like that, but she did it. Apparently she thought it was stylish, and apparently she never bothered to consider the fact that she just looked unkempt. Furthermore, she looked like she didn't care enough to even run a comb through her hair, which is disrespectful to the people and the events that she was supposed to be visiting, representing the royal family. Regardless, let's move on from that. That was Tiaragate and the famous "what Meghan wants, Meghan gets," and $10,000 for the hair and the makeup, and that was the best they could do. I am reminded of the immortal words of Dolly Parton, who said, "It takes a lot of money to look this cheap." Right, on to the wedding. As we are approaching the wedding, we then have the whole "Kate made me cry" thing. Well, this is a story that began emerging on Quora and other social media resources, but the furthest I can trace it back is to Quora. And the story came out that Nutmeg was actively resistant to little Charlotte being a flower girl, junior bridesmaid, whatever the devil she was, but that the Queen had insisted And as a result, Nutmeg was determined to make the experience difficult for Charlotte. The dress, as we have all seen, was a mess and did not fit the child properly. The child, who was accustomed to wearing socks or stockings or tights or something, along with her shoes, was told she would have to wear shoes with no socks, and it hurt her feet. And of course, she wasn't happy. She was 3 years old. And then there were the allegations that Nutmeg was actively favoring Jessica Mulrooney's daughter. Remember, she and Jessica were friends at the time. That's before Jessica got markled. And little Ivy, Jessica's daughter, was singled out of the crowd to be the most important of these little flower girls, to diminish Charlotte's standing in the group, and that she was constantly unfavorably comparing Charlotte to Jessica. Pretty nasty stories. Also, it is at this time that the story came out that Catherine was so upset by the dress in particular that her daughter was supposed to be out in public with in this very high-profile wedding that clearly didn't fit her, and Kate at one point was reduced to tears. So that was the original story. Now Nutmeg, because she's Nutmeg, immediately flipped that first chance she got and said, no, I was the one who cried. And Kate apologized. Remember that in the Oprah interview? I'm not going to try to disparage Kate, but she made me cry, and she apologized for it. It's like, apparently what happened was Kate did send flowers in an effort to sort of broker a peace. And if Kate did, I hate to call her Kate like that, that's disrespectful. If Catherine did apologize, it's pretty clear that it was to keep the peace and to pacify this insane bridezilla, which is pretty much what was going on. So, yes, and Nutmeg jumped on that as proof that she was the one who had been wronged. How you can turn, I bullied a 3-year-old, into I am the victim is beyond me. But apparently she did it. But the whole story was coming out in Quara as it was happening. And apparently the story went back to sources within the dressmakers' company who were there on the scene attempting to fit these dresses and watching it all as it transpired. But again, no one will really document this, so we have to say allegedly. So that takes us to the actual wedding. And at the actual wedding, we saw none of Nutmeg's family, with the exception of her mother. We saw a star-studded cavalcade marching into the church, including George Clooney and his wife Amal, and he rather famously said he had never met them before, but he was on the guest list, along with Idris Elba, Oprah Winfrey, Gayle King, a lot of people of color, apparently, because Nutmeg had to push that part of her agenda. Her mother was the only guest on her side of the family. Later, in the Netflix docudrama, we had her niece Ashley, and apparently she and Ashley were close up to that point. So we have Ashley, who was expecting to be invited. Now, this is Samantha's daughter, and apparently Ashley and Samantha are estranged, and family dynamics and taking sides seems to be coming out a lot in this dynamic. So Ashley was expecting to be invited, but of course Nutmeg didn't invite her. She couldn't, because the palace thought it would look strange if she invited Ashley, but didn't invite anybody else from her family. Really? Really? That is one of the most absurd stories I can even imagine. And Ashley has got to be a brain-dead, flatline idiot if she bought into that. I know she's a lawyer, but I've seen lawyers do some pretty stupid things in my day. The fact is that Ashley's friendship was useful to Nutmeg when Nutmeg was working on Suits, playing a lawyer, and had a niece who was a lawyer in her back pocket and could obviously show up on set talking about conversations she had with her niece, the lawyer, la 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 la. And it was a valuable relationship to her. But like everybody else in her life, leading up to the wedding, Ashley quickly got markled as soon as she was ready to tie the knot. But then later, when Samantha's lawsuit crops up, Ashley gets unmarkled again. How interesting is that? So this is where we are at this point. We've gotten to the wedding. We've managed to kind of get these two hitched. But all of her allegedly close friends from Suits were not invited to the evening reception. In fact, the people who were invited to the evening reception were people who had status, either in the UK or as Hollywood celebrities. They were the ones who were invited to the evening reception. The proles were coming to the church. So that's how it sort of shifted out. And I would say at this point, what the takeaway is that even before they tied the knot, the red flags were a-flying. Not all of us were picking up on it. I know they weren't even a blip on my radar at that point, to be perfectly honest with you. I thought Nutmeg was a Canadian actress from Vancouver. Some of you may remember that. Some of you who have been following the Just Chatting since it began may remember that I believe it was the first video I did about this. I was like, she's a Canadian actress from Vancouver. And Canadians were writing in like crazy, saying, oh no, we don't own her. She's yours. And now you kind of see why. But up until that point, it was not as if the red flags weren't out there. It was not as if Nutmeg wasn't actively flexing her muscles. She was bullying people. She was dumping old friends who were now of no more value to her. She was encouraging the sock puppet to do the same. Many of his friends were not invited to that wedding, and apparently the few that were, again, were not invited to the evening reception because they were not valuable to her. Once she stepped up to the point at which she was marrying into the royal family, she needed a higher class of people, and the other people that she used as stepping stones on her way up were just ghosted. It's very interesting because I have always considered her an adventuress. And adventurous is an interesting word because on the surface it means a female adventurer, like Amelia Earhart and those other intrepid women in the early 20th century who were flying airplanes, racing automobiles, participating in cross-country rally races. Well, no, not exactly. An adventuress was a term that came in the 20s to mean a gold digger, a woman who is seeking to climb socially. And it was sort of a polite euphemism for gold digger, social climber, money-grubbing tart, fill in the blank. And I have always thought of her in that sense. Now, one thing I have to say, and one of the things this recap has done for me, is it has reminded me of how very good she was at it. Whatever you say about her, that woman is probably one of the most successful social climbers we will ever see in our lifetimes. Now, I'll grant you, that's a lot like saying most successful serial killer, most successful, I don't know, nun shamer, whatever. It's not a good thing, but we do have to give credit where it's due. As a social climber, she has no equal. All right, that is what I have for you today. We are going to take a look at a slideshow on the way out, and then we are going to pick up once they are actually, I was going to say husband and wife, but perhaps I should say Duke and Duchess. We're going to pick up and we're going to continue this recap journey because it is important that we keep this in mind. All right, I will be back with you folks next Thursday. And in the meantime, have a terrific day.